Good evening, everyone. My name is Talha Köse. I'm the director of SETA Brussels office. So today we have a very interesting and very important panel about the recent situation in Turkish-Greek relations. Of course, today is an important day in Turkish-Greek relations as well. It is the 100th anniversary of the Lausanne Treaty. So this treaty provided stable relations for a long time, but at the same time, there were some remaining issues. Of course, our panel will not be based on this Lausanne Treaty, but we'll be focusing on the recent developments in Turkish-Greek relations, and especially the process of de-escalation that we experienced in the last couple of months. So, as you know, starting from 2019, there were some escalation with regard to Eastern Mediterranean between Turkey and Greece. And unfortunately, these tensions has increased until 2022. So in the winter of 2023, Turkey experienced a difficult earthquake in Kahramanmaraş center. And there was a very sympathetic move and supportive move from Greek side. And there was also another accident in Greece, and Turkey also sent positive regards. And two countries experienced elections in the summer, and we now have two strong leaders with strong public support. So what we're going to do today is to discuss the recent tensions between those two countries, and more specifically focus on a positive agenda, forward-looking agenda in Turkish-Greek relations. So what is the potential for this agenda? What are some limitations and obstacles to improvement of Turkish-Greek relations? So we're going to discuss this with four very important, very distinguished scholars that are studying and that are writing on Turkish-Greek relations. So our first speaker will be Associate Professor Zuhal Mert Uzuner from Marmara University. So we will have Dimitris Triantaphyllou from Panteion University of Athens. So he has spent 13 years at Kadir Has University, has been working on Turkish-Greek relations for a long time. Our third speaker will be Associate Professor Mehmet Ekinci. He is also an expert on Turkish-Greek relations and international relations of Turkey. He's a professor, associate professor at Police Institute. And our fourth speaker will be Panayotis Tsakonas. He's a professor of international foreign policy and security studies at National Kapodistrian University of Athens. So our speakers have distinctive experience in Turkish-Greek relations. So I will start with Zuhal Mert Uzuner. And my first question, I would be happy if you wrap up in 5 minutes. So how did these, as I mentioned, in 2019, there was a new cycle of escalation between Turkish-Greek relations, which deteriorated relations. So how does this tension is seen from Turkey? What are the reasons, and how do you think this issue become a significant tension between two countries?
Thanks first of all for this timely event, because I believe in the rapprochement process of Greek-Turkish relations, because we have so many things to discuss and to do together, as we can see in the last 5 years. So maybe we need to talk more about cooperation. It's time to do that. So when we look at this, the difficult times in Greek-Turkish relations, we may find out many different the periods actually. In the modern Republic of Turkey era, there were so many rapprochement era, but on the other side, we see that there were so difficult times. When we look at this 2019, it is maybe related with the historical accumulation. So at the end, we need to refer the social memory, so the memories of the bitter the experiences, events. So these are important, but also we need to underline that the most important dimension in Greek-Turkish relations had been always the regional and global developments. Whenever the global developments create a kind of competitive atmosphere in our region, we can see that it's not so good for Greek-Turkish relations, especially the greater actors in global politics creates sometimes so destructive impact. When we look at the 2019, first of all, we need to remember this declining relations between Turkey and United States, and that created a negative, let's say, the atmosphere, not only in the Western side of Turkey. We need to explain also it had so negative event in the southern part of Turkey. So Turkey had a very important security threat. First of all, this is so important. Another very important event, maybe somehow connected with that period, was the security consideration, again deriving from the coup d'etat initiative realized by the Gülenists. So this is somehow considered so hostile and negative from the Turkish aspect, and it is considered also somehow supported from the outside. So that feeling of insecurity fed by this, this is so common for all the countries in our region. We have so much sympathy to refer this that the neighboring countries are all hostile, somehow supporting negative events against us. So that feeling is somehow supported or fed by what was happening around or inside Turkey. So one of the most important reason, of course, was related with continuous war in southeast Turkey. Let's say the Syrian war, civil war, it is somehow very critical for Turkey because we were experiencing a huge flow of let's say the asylum seekers, refugees. So they were trying to save their lives, but the numbers were really rising, and Turkey was trying to find a way to deal with it. But there was not enough support. That was also another very important problem for Turkey's security considerations. So we can say that the most important reason behind the rising tension in Greek-Turkish relations was mostly related with this rising security concerns, which created a kind of reflective foreign policy. And also it created also another dynamic in Eastern Mediterranean, more competitive, more, let's say, challenging the perspective taken by Turkish foreign policy. We may start with this. If we need to talk more, maybe we may continue.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to you. So, Dimitri, you know both Turkish society and Greek society and examined perspectives and perceptions of both societies very closely. So, of course, as Turkey, the general Turkish public don't understand why Greek side feels so threatened from Turkey. So what is your perspective? How does Greek side, Greek society, or Greek decision makers feel about the current tension, the ongoing tension, and what are their threat perceptions in this regard?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your question. Thank you for the invitation to take part in this interesting discussion. First of all, because you mentioned at the beginning, I was until earlier this month, 13 years in Turkey. And I must say that 13 years in Turkey as a Greek academic, as a Greek scholar of international relations, teaching at the Turkish university, I've never felt, either from my students or my colleagues or the public at large, threatened or or not at ease. And in fact, there's been tremendous interest, even though there are very few classes taught at Turkish universities on Greek-Turkish relations, but there's always been a tremendous interest privately by students or other colleagues or anyone else in public, my bakal in the corner where in the neighborhood I lived, anyone else, to ask me questions. And so there's a fascination with the Greeks, and that's a given. And I mean, because you also mentioned the earthquakes earlier this year, it's also, one could see this, because I happened to be in Turkey in February, I mean, the whole last few months when the earthquake struck, and it was interesting talking to people I hardly knew, thanking me for the Greek help, even though there was just as much help from the French and the Israelis and the rest of the world. But it was very interesting in that sense. Now, what's interesting is also, and I think I should note this because we're having this academic discussion, and I was thinking of an incident. I first came to Turkey at the time was as a tourist in 2002. But then I came back in 2003. I was working at the EU Institute for Security Studies in Paris, and a Spanish colleague of mine and I were invited to come to Istanbul at a meeting organized by an American think tank. And I remember my colleague Martin coming to my office in Paris a month before we were supposed to fly to Istanbul, asking me, Dimitri, do we need a visa to go to Turkey? And I go, Martin, I don't need one, I as a Greek, but you have to check, maybe you need one. And Martin goes, are you always joking? If you don't need one, the Greek, I don't need one, the Spaniard. I said, it doesn't really work like this. Nevertheless, Martin never got his visa. We arrive at Ataturk airport at the time. We go through passport control. I let Martin go first. The customs officer points, tells him to go get his visa. Martin is shocked. I said, don't worry, I'm waiting for you. He goes, buys his visa, he comes back. We pass passport control, and then as we pass passport control, there's like a pole and a huge banner hanging, and there's a Greek flag and a Turkish flag. And this was the time when Greece and Turkey were bidding together for the European Football Championship. I can't remember for which year. We did not get it, but we were bidding. It was a joint bid. Second shock for Martin, and Martin turns to me and goes, you guys, meaning you Greeks and Turks, have been joking with us all these years. And I go, no, Martin, just because we have differences does not mean we don't talk to each other. And I think ever since then, during the rapprochement process, even during the recent crisis years, we've always found a way to talk to each other, at least at this academic, intellectual level, and also at the policy level most of the time. So this is something that we should keep in mind. So it also shows a fascination stemming from the fact that, yes, you mentioned the Lausanne Treaty and the significance for the boundaries of Republican Turkey and today's Turkey, setting the boundaries. A couple of years ago, Greece celebrated its bicentennial, and obviously the founding of the modern Greek state is also very much linked to its relationship at the time to the Ottoman Empire and therefore modern Turkey. So the histories of both our countries are linked. And therefore one cannot escape thinking about the other. But of course, over time too, there has been, and I think there's an ontological insecurity factor that comes into play from the Greek side, but also from the Turkish side. But from the Greek side, the threat perception is that, we have a neighbor with whom there are differences that need to be resolved. We feel threatened at times, but this is a neighbor that, is demographically growing. Greece is a country that's in demographic decrease. At the last census last year, I think it was, or 2 years ago, Greece is a country that lost 500,000 people to 10.5 million. Turkey is a country that in 2 decades would be a country of 100 million. This has also an impact on the economy, the size of the Turkish economy. Never mind the crisis. Crises come and go, but the economy is bound to grow, and therefore its importance. And while Greece has maintained this importance, there is, an imbalance which has an impact. Therefore, has an impact on the Greek mindset, whether it's the public at large or it's a political elite or anybody. And so, if it were, say, the president of Bulgaria making statements to ministers about Greece, okay, but it's a president of Turkey or it's a Turkish elite that periodically do this. And this has a tremendous impact, and it's reflected on well, what do the Turks want? We are partners, we are neighbors, we are allies, but still we're not sure about what the intentions are. And I think this is something that, as I said, it's interlogical insecurity. I know many colleagues in Greece and Turkey are actually dealing with this issue and trying to figure it out, where everything becomes a Greek-Turkish issue, everything. Because, you know, even the recent decision by the Turkish government not to grant the ecumenical patriarch the right to hold mass in Panayotis in the monastery on the 15th of August, it immediately becomes a Greek-Turkish issue. Maybe it's not necessarily, but everything is sort of inflated. And I think this is something that we need to work on both sides. And on the other hand, for the last 13 years that I've been here, I had this feeling before I moved to Turkey, but for the last 13 years that I've been in Turkey, or I was in Turkey, I also have the feeling that, you know, this factor of insecurity is also something that permeates the Turks, interestingly enough. This bigger country from the Greek perspective, this country that's potentially going to grow, this regional power that has the potential of being more than just a regional power, also seems to be affected by what the Greeks do. And so in this sense, I was just want to reflect on something. I mean, Zuhal made a very interesting point about how greater powers, when they come in, they impact on the agenda. And therefore, you know, this is where the Greeks playing with the Europeans or the Americans has an impact on the bilateral relationship. But when you say this, Turks and Turkey forgets that part of the rise of Turkey was predicated on the special relationship it had for decades with the United States. And that made it also a great power. And now that it might have lost this for reasons that we all know and have to do with the dynamics of Turkish foreign policy and its relations with the US, well, yes, that greater power, the US, is starting also to have a different perspective when it comes to Greece and other neighbors. So it's not exactly a very clear statement from a Greek perspective, in the sense that, but this is, Turkey has become strong on the basis of the US relationship, and then which started off in 1952, I think it was, when your president back then, Celal Bayar, spoke to the joint houses of Congress, and that started the relationship, and something that the Greek prime minister did a couple of years ago, which showed that maybe things are slowly changing. So the great powers have always been there and have had an influence. It's how we balance this in terms of our relationship. And I think from a Greek perspective, ultimately, it's about finding, because of the negative demographics, because of the economic trends that are different, the imbalance that's growing, finding a way to use that to balance the relationship so that we can move forward, which is what we are trying to do here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So I'm going to come back with different questions, but now I'm going to switch to Mehmet Uğur Ekinci. Mehmet Uğur, as you know, Turkey and Greece had very important meetings, high-level cooperation meetings, but suddenly in 2019, the relations between two countries started to escalate. So there was tense relations. So, I mean, why do you think from the Turkish perspective, this issue get out of control and somehow the period of quiet relations have escalated? So what is the reflection from Turkey's point of view with regard to Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean? What's your perspective on this?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to offer my deepest sympathies regarding the recent wildfires in Greece. Coming back to your question, the shift actually started early in 2010s. And if we titled this panel as starting of a new era or something, actually we see a number of new eras happening for the last few decades. And those years of deterioration, I think, was quite remarkable, especially towards the end of 2000s and early 2020s. This was mainly caused by the changing balances in international and regional geopolitics, which caused shifts in both Greek and Turkish foreign policies. Instead of an agent-based explanation, I'm more inclined to explain these shifts in bilateral relations, positive and negative, to certain shocks, external shocks or external factors. We can also explain the rapprochement in the early 2000s with structural factors like the emergence of a common European vision for not only Turkey and Greece, but also Cyprus. But it didn't stay for long. We know that from mid-2000s, the prospects of Turkish membership to European Union started to diminish, and a settlement, agreed settlement in Cyprus also became more and more unlikely. But the good relations between Turkey and Greece stayed for a bit longer. But the main factor which caused big negative shifts was the changing dynamics in the Middle East and the increased differences in terms of security priorities and foreign policy preferences between Turkey and the Western world. As Turkey and the Western world had differences, Turkey started to implement more autonomous foreign and defense policies. And this caused more suspicions regarding Turkey's intentions, not only in Greece, but also in other countries around Turkey. And when we look at the Greek foreign policy from mid-2010s onwards, especially under the government of Neo-Demokratia, Greece wanted to first secure itself, but at the same time, capitalize on the changing or deteriorating relations between Turkey and the West and Turkey and certain Eastern Mediterranean countries by building more partnerships and
I think we lost contact with Mehmet. So, I mean, until we get him, I'm going to ask the similar question to Panayotis. So Panayotis, as the Turkish public, of course, there is sense of course, security threat, as Dimitris also mentioned, from the Greek side. But from your point of view, what went wrong in 2019, and what were the things that made Greek public, Greek officials uncomfortable about Turkey's foreign policy moves or other moves? So what are the sources of the threat from your perspective?
Well, let me, first of all, I would like to thank you for extending this invitation. Let me start by highlighting the fact that Zuhal has already mentioned about Turkey being Greece's major security threat already since the mid-70s, and most of Greek decision makers relate this fear on the part of threat on the part of Greece with Turkey's intervention in Cyprus in the mid-70s, by all means. But Dimitris mentioned in 2003 we used to live in a quite different universe, actually, with Greek-Turkish relations being at the highest level, let's say, of having cordial relations after allowing Turkey Greece lifting its veto in the European Union and opened the doors to Turkey's candidacy. These were the days, as we say, for Greek-Turkish relations, for cordial Greek-Turkish relations, which unfortunately did not last for many years. But I think for most Greek decision makers and policy analysts, it is since the attempted coup in Turkey in 1916 that there has been, I would say, a turn on the part of Turkey from a kind of a security-based foreign policy to one which, at least for Greek decision makers and security analysts, it's been characterized as a power-based, a kind of an assertive policy. So since then, it seems that, again, from the Greek perspective, or based on the Greek perspective, there are certain evidences, I would say, that that can be found of this new policy perspective in Turkey's reactions to a number of issues or to a number of fronts. One might refer, for example, to one or two examples regarding Turkey's direct involvement in the Libyan civil war, and then November 2019 signing of a military and maritime zone delineation agreement with the government of the Tripoli-based government of national accord, that at the time has sparked harsh reactions in Athens, as it infringed upon maritime zones adjacent to the Greek islands, to certain big Greek islands such as Crete, Kassos, Rhodes, or Kapathos. And it seems that it has violated the principle of international law that the islands are taken into account when delineating an exclusive economic zone. And of course, there are some other incidents or examples which have caused serious concern to Greek decision makers. Most notably, what has happened in March 2020 with regard to actions taken by Turkey on the Greek-Turkish border on the river Evros, when it seems that there has been a kind of an attempt for instrumentalizing migrants and refugees for certain purposes Turkey was interested in forwarding at the time. And of course, the most, I would say, important event, at least from a Greek perspective, which has to do with the deployment of a Turkish research vessel, that was in summer of 2020, which was escorted by several warships in a non-delimited area that Greece considered as an exclusive economic zone. And that was something that, the announcement of this unilateral decision by Turkey to conduct research activities followed an agreement which has been signed by or between Greece and Egypt at the time. That was in August 2020, in accordance with the United Nations Law of the Sea. So I think probably the most important cause of concern for Greek decision makers is the so-called narrative of the blue homeland, to the extent that it challenges what has been agreed on in terms of borders and sovereign arrangements. And it seems that there have been clear-cut conditions or provisions of the Treaty of Lausanne on those issues. So there was indeed a serious concern on the part of Greek decision makers, to the extent that there has been also an attempt by Turkey for connecting demilitarization of certain islands with the ownership of the islands, and this has lasted up to 2022, early this year. So Greek-Turkish relations have remained extremely tense by all means through the year 2022. Further, as I mentioned, cultivating Greek decision makers and the Greek public fears. And at the top of it, it was, I must say, the president of Turkey himself, who dialed up the rhetoric against Greece to hitherto, I would say, unheard of extremes by threatening Greece that Turkey might come suddenly one night, and some other issues which have been highlighting at the time, adding to the concern, I would say, of Greek decision makers and the public alike for a possible invasion of the Aegean islands. So there have been, of course, other threats or made by new threats were also made by the implication that Turkey's, I remember, ballistic missile, homegrown ballistic missile, might be aimed at the Greek capital. So these are some of the issues that had caused serious concern, not simply to the public, but also to Greek decision makers. And from my point of view, from an academic point of view, who is very much interested in rapprochement, not to mention resolution of the Greek-Turkish conflict, it seems to me that it has, to a certain extent, delegitimized all those voices in Greece who are attempting to somehow highlight the need for a rapprochement with Turkey and do our best even for a resolution of the conflict.
Thank you very much. So it's a very good summary. So Mehmet Hocam, can you hear us? Okay, so Mehmet Hocam, so Panayotis summarized the threat perception from the Greek side, especially the migration issue, deployment of vessels, the border issue, the rhetoric of the political leaders, as well as deployment of certain missiles from the perspective of the Greece, which make Greek side uncomfortable. So, Mehmet Hocam, from perspective, as you were discussing about what made Turkey feel threatened in 2019, starting from 2019. So please continue your explanation. So how the security issue is seen, perceived from the Turkish side. Zuhal, I think Mehmet has some technical difficulties. Can you respond to the same question?
Yes, of course. I need to... okay, it's unmuted. From Turkish perspective, of course, I always refer something very important. If we think ourselves in a different geography with a different neighbor, so maybe the same problems won't be the problem as we feel today. So it is related with how you perceive all these happenings. From that approach, I always say to my students, just imagine that Greek islands were in the Greece was in another place, and in the same geography there was Azerbaijan. So what kind of perceptions we could have? So this is related with not directly geography. It is related with how we perceive all these happenings just because of your experiences, your memory. So these are so important. From Turkish aspect, that the different actors, bigger actors, had the different connections with Greece. So from historical perspective, maybe we can explain that better. That's why I wanted to start with the security concerns, threat perception. It's not coming directly from the Greek state and Greek people, maybe from other actors, and their intentions became always so big problem for Turkish considerations. So that's why the deployment of these means became a problem, because the problem was not directly related with Greece maybe, but with another actor, with bigger, maybe much more threatening actors. So these are so important, because when we remember the case of Alexandropoli, this DDH settlement of the American bases, for example. So why it is a problem? Because we are in the same alliance, NATO. So we have someone, let's say the concept papers, common threat perceptions. So why it became a big problem or a discussion issue in Turkey? From Turkish aspect, not Greek people, but the other actors could be much more threatening by sometimes motivating the not Greek people, but Greek governments. This is always so, let's say, suspicious from Turkish public opinion perspective. I need to underline that. Another very important issue, it is not related with people, never. Because when we look at the people relations, you can see in the same period of time, the number of the tourists were the same. You can see that the transportation means were full. So there was no big problem in between people. But as I underline again, the governmental contacts, especially with some bigger actors who can be somehow threatening the Turkish, let's say, the position and let's say the priorities. Another very important issue related with what Turkey perceived in that period of time, preferences of this third actor cannot change Turkish people's will to be inside the sea. This is the so important message coming from Turkey. We need to underline that, because I know that from the Greek perspective, this blue homeland seems a little bit, let's say, the annoying concept because of this, the very difficult language and discourse, as the Professor Tsakonas said. It is sometimes so difficult to understand from the ordinary people's perspective. Blue homeland means the having a vision related with seas. So Turkish people, the people living in Anatolia with this whole coast, has a vision related with the seas. We want a share to be inside the sea with our neighbor. Actually, this is peaceful from that perspective. What does not seem so peaceful is Turkey and Turkish politicians felt that there is a kind of exclusion of Turkey. And doing that by using, sometimes, let me to use this concept, utilization of the other actors and their relative powerful position in order to realize this exclusive political targets. So that is so important to understand. From Turkish point of view, Turkey wants to create a platform, a conference or a meeting to discuss all these sharing issues in the seas. But if Turkey felt that there is no way to communicate or to be in the table. So if there is no way to be in the table, so how you should, let's say, raise your voice to say, hey, I'm here. I want to be represented sometimes in this the geography. This is the Turkish perspective. Okay, we may discuss how much right way to explain it, and sometimes we may have very tense language to do that. But what is critical to understand, this geography is belonging to people, not maybe the states only. People, and people shall know to share what we have in our geography, because at the end we need to utilize. I want to give my time to Mehmet. Maybe he may want to continue.
Mehmet, sorry for technical issues, but so Zuhal mentioned that especially from Turkish point of view, the sentiment of exclusion from Turkish side, as well as the influence of the third parties, played negative roles. So how would you summarize the concerns of Turkish side in addition to these two major points?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I apologize for the disconnection, but I'm kind of struggling here with the connection. I hope I can finish up. What I was trying to say in my first intervention was actually a response to Professor Dimitris' question: why would Turkey, such a stronger actor, would be fearful from Greece as a country? Well, actually, the concerns about Turkey regarding Greece or regarding these bilateral disputes was not directly about Greece, but it was mostly about the future of international and regional geopolitics, how it is going to unfold. I mean, I am considering the period in starting from the second half of the 2010s, where Turkey had to adopt certain unilateral policies regarding its security because of the differences in terms of priorities and preferences with the West. This caused more gaps in the understanding of issues between the Western world and Turkey. And Greece started to perceive more insecurity about Turkey's potential intentions and started to develop more contacts, more partnerships, both in the Western world and also in the Eastern Mediterranean, which in turn caused more insecurity from Turkey, like it's being sidelined in world politics and especially in regional systems and maybe within the NATO alliance. So as we see, this is a cyclical, it's a spiraling security dilemma happening between both countries. So that's why I am a bit cautious about naming this new positive era as a new era, because I see that the future of bilateral relations, I mean, I don't like to say this, but will depend a lot on how international and regional geopolitical dynamics will unfold. If there is another episode where Turkey and the Western world or some Eastern Mediterranean countries start to experience rifts in their relations, Greece will feel insecure, and at the same time, while trying to improve its security, Greece also may, and it has been, trying to capitalize on this to elevate its status, regional and also within the NATO alliance, like being the most reliable or loyal or committed ally of the West, and also presenting Turkey as a potential aggressor, not only to Greece but also the whole Western world. So, I mean, and then this behavior will in turn push Turkey to engage in certain policies which will create insecurity in Greece and so on. So, in this new era, I am proposing two solutions for actors. Well, these are very general solutions. It depends on the material, especially regarding two countries, matrices of benefit and loss. But there are two main aspects the politicians, the decision makers should address. There is one rational aspect of bilateral relations and also an irrational aspect of bilateral relations. So in terms of rational aspects, there should be new mechanisms which establishes mutual interdependence and a long-term interdependence. I've been reading some reports by think tankers, including the think tank from Greece, which is participating in this panel. There are some ideas about how Turkey and Greece can join their forces in, let's say, energy or in environmental matters. I think this is necessary. I think this goes beyond rational calculations in terms of only defense or foreign policy. But this is actually a matter of regional survival. So this is important and this is rational. So we have to address this. We have to discuss more such venues of cooperation. And in terms of the irrational aspect, I don't see this as the main cause or the drive of escalation of problems. But still, whenever problems resurface within the international or regional larger geopolitical landscape, these irrational aspects escalate or multiply the degree of tensions. And there I mean the emotional and reactive aspect, which emanates not only from policymakers, but also from the media, also even individuals who are sharing their opinions on the social media. So I think new discourses should be sought in both countries regarding the other. And I mean, Turkey needs to do a lot, yes, I admit this, but also Greece needs to do a lot on that, because when we look at the foreign policy discourses of Greece and perceptions of threat, Turkey is number one. And it has been so for a long time. So it is maybe more difficult for decision makers, even decision makers or leaders, to change their discourses. I mean, we saw when Mr. Mitsotakis talked about bold solutions, and there were a lot of negative reactions coming from different parts of Greek politics. But it's difficult, I understand, for both sides, but also we have to strive on that. As think tankers, we should also try to adopt a more balanced language whenever crises erupt, to see possible solutions, short-term and long-term solutions, to mitigate the negative effects of the turbulent international dynamics.
Thank you very much, Mehmet. So now, Professor Triantaphyllou, I mean, as we mentioned, we need to be more forward-looking in our perspective. And Mehmet mentioned that there is this ongoing security dilemma that feed each other. So what are your suggestions and recommendations how to break this security dilemma? As we mentioned, you know, shared problems, you know, the disasters and difficult events generate some kind of empathy. But I think we need to go forward, move a little bit, you know, structural level to overcome these dilemma issues. So what are your suggestions? What may be some constructive steps that can establish, that can institutionalize this positive momentum?
Yeah, I mean, I like the way Mehmet broke it into rational proposals and irrational aspects. But you know, first of all, the proposals are there. We can discuss them, and I think as we discuss them on both sides, we might get more ideas. And I think our two governments have actually set out a pretty interesting plan. You know, this last Erdogan-Mitsotakis meeting is actually a pretty detailed plan of how to move forward. And I think this gives a lot of perspective. And I'm glad that they've done this, albeit what, you know, pundits on both sides say in the public sphere. They've worked very well and it seems to be working. But, you know, first of all, let me go to the irrational part. You know, it was this interesting discussion about threat perceptions. I mean, as I was hearing Panayotis talk about the Greek position, I was thinking, yeah, you know, for the Greeks, for the average Greek, it's like, well, Greece is a status quo power, and therefore everything is that Turkey does is perceived as if threatening the status quo. And then I also like the way Zuhal, you know, her suggestion, how she deals with it with her students, and if it was Azerbaijan, but also, you know, you talked about the sentiment of exclusion when it comes, say, to the Eastern Med. But, you know, and so Turkish policy expressed because of its sentiment of exclusion. So if we view the blue homeland as part of that, from a Greek perspective, it's viewed because of the threat perception that exists in both countries as a further imposition of the Turkish agenda, because Turkey considers itself to be a primus inter pares power within the region. And because then we go back to, you know, the mid-1970s, as Panayotis talked about, this cannot go away from the general public sentiment. Which also brings me to this other point, because, you know, it's nice to talk about the public and the public dimension, and ELIAMEP and other actors and the IPC have been doing this regular polling of Greek and Turkish public opinion. And yes, in particular, it's been changing since the earthquakes and so on. But how relevant is public opinion? Is the relevance of public opinion the same in both countries? In the Greek case, it's very relevant. I mean, in fact, when the Greek prime minister made his remarks to the Greek press after meeting President Erdogan in Vilnius, he ended up saying that, you know, whatever is designed, and if we can actually move forward beyond rapprochement to actually finding solutions to the issues that divide us, this will all have to go through parliament, because this is what the constitution says and so on. It's also very telling that in terms of the way Greek diplomacy is being conducted, there is this public element. So when Panayotis talks about losing a lot of times because of what's happening, the way Turkish actions are perceived in the public sphere, people like Panayotis and myself and other colleagues that are more moderate, sometimes we feel we are losing the battle because the more radical colleagues express themselves and touch upon the sentiment of the people. It means that public opinion has a role, while in Turkey, I am not so sure. I mean, public opinion is maybe used, instrumentalized more. We know how power is conducted, and diplomacy has always been something left to the elites, to the diplomats, to the politicians, to the military. And public opinion comes in when it suits, in a way, the actions of a particular government. And so maybe this is something we need to work on. I mean, how relevant is public opinion? How we can, because some of the work that needs to be done is not bilaterally also, is each side within itself to deal with these irrational aspects, because they might influence whatever outcome. And let's hope that, you know, in these talks between the two sides and over the next few months, something more positive and a step forward happens. So I think this is something we need to work on and see whether it's the same, weighted the same. Now, in terms of the rational aspects, absolutely. I mean, Mehmet mentioned some of the things, you know, many think tankers and authors in Greece are writing about the need to move forward and look at the common challenges. Right, the wild forest fires tells you it's not the climate change; there's a climate crisis. It's the whole Mediterranean is burning. And other parts of the world, but in our part called the Mediterranean, or in particular this Mediterranean, fires are happening in Turkey just as much as in Greece. More intensity in Greece today, tomorrow there may be more intense in Turkey. Countries cannot cope with it on their own. And there's a recognition of this, right? The fact that even Turkey has sent 2 helicopters, it's because this goes through the EU rescue mechanisms, civil protection mechanisms that the EU established to deal with some of these issues. So even as a non-EU power, it's within that process, just like Jordanians and Egyptians and others sending help to the Greeks today and maybe to Turkey tomorrow. Same thing happened with the earthquakes. The Greeks that came, the EMAC, the firefighters and others came within the EU package, right? It was the EU en masse coming through a concerted mechanism to help Turkey. And then individually, each country played its role. So one is to see how to work on these common challenges. One, obviously, is dealing with the climate crisis. And so there is potential there. The other thing we know is about how the sentiment of exclusion from the Turkish side is not seen as a sentiment of imposition of the Turkish agenda on the Greek side. And here, I think that even though whatever initiatives the Greeks have taken, the trilaterals and others, and you know, the East Med Gas Forum and the Philia Forum, they're always, whenever you hear the Greek Prime Minister speak at these trilateral meetings, he always, in all his speeches, he says that the doors are open to other countries, in particular Turkey. But maybe for me, because this might address the balance, a recognition that both sides have an equally crucial role on certain issues in the region, maybe Greece, Athens and Ankara can take a role. And it's something I've been working on with a Turkish colleague, with Mustafa Aydin. And because we are also all Black Sea hands and we've dealt with Black Sea security and the BSEC, the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Organization, maybe Athens and Ankara can take a lead to create an East Med Economic Forum organization, or literal states coming together. Because if you look, I mean, yes, the BSEC has had a share of problems in that particular geography now. More and more countries within the BSEC do not have good relations with each other. We see what's happening, but still, it has lasted. It came around at the end of the Cold War because countries in the region were concerned for their own security. Ankara and Moscow took the lead in suggesting this. If you look at the way it's set up, it has working groups which deal with these low politics issues, which are of interest to everybody. Everybody wants to assure that trade, whether it's bilateral or multilateral, is there unobstructed. Everybody wants to assure that the tourism, especially in the summer months, is unobstructed. And that, you know, one needs to work on energy issues. I mean, and so many other issues that stem from it. And maybe this is potentially something where it's not about Turkey feeling excluded because the other regional actors are involved in these trilaterals or quadrilaterals or whatever organizations are being built. But maybe Athens and Ankara need to consider leading the process for something that's wider. Yes, there are difficulties. How do you bring in Cyprus and so on? But I think diplomats always find ways of dealing with this. So maybe this is something of taking the lead. And this is a way to also work around what Zuhal mentioned, the idea of a multilateral forum, which is something that both Charles Michel and President Erdogan have addressed. It's part of the European Council meetings, but no one is moving ahead with it. Turkey keeps talking about it, but I don't see any particular format or formulation. Maybe there's something there to work on. Apart from that, this is one thing, and I'll stop. I mean, I have many ideas, but very quickly. Other things. I gave you my example at the beginning, how we've always discussed with each other. Well, how do you make this more systematic and not, I mean, how do you create veritable, true epistemic communities between the two sides, where both governments, through liaisons, make sure that Turkish universities and Greek universities, and maybe even at secondary level and other levels, not just at university level, work together, bid together. There is pressure from both Athens and Ankara to Brussels when Greek and Turkish universities bid together for Horizon projects and other projects. Not because, you know, I have an idea and I call my friend Zuhal and say, do you want to get involved? And no, but in a concerted way to build real epistemic communities, whether it's projects in the social sciences, we're all social scientists, or the natural sciences, or whatever. And maybe we can work around what's there, what's available to do this. The last thing I want to raise, because, you know, one of the dimensions we don't talk about, and this is also linked to public opinion, is the fact that our parliamentarians do not talk to each other. They only talk to each other within the framework of, the Parliamentary Assembly of NATO when they meet, the Council of Europe, the OSCE, and so on. But there's no Greek-Turkish Parliamentary Friendship Group. We know why. Greece, the Greek side says, since the casus belli, there is not possible. Well, can we rework this? Can we rework? Because I've been involved in some meetings where, organized by third parties, where Greeks and Turkish parliamentarians have come together and to discuss this, because there's no official friendship parliamentary group. And it's one of the ideas that I've heard big bandied about, and it needs to be considered, because the Greeks say casus belli. Of course, the word casus belli is not anywhere in the Turkish parliamentary resolution. But in general, it suggests this. Is there a way that maybe the Turkish side can work on this that says that it's not a threat, an implied threat, whatever the which might allow, therefore, Greeks and Turkish parliamentarians to move forward with this dialogue? And I'm just thinking, because I was looking at the composition, you know, we just had elections, and just like we've had the compositions now of the parliamentary groups, of the committees, and I was just thinking, seeing the composition of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Parliamentary Committee in Greece, well, led by Dora Bakoyani. Dimitris Avramopoulos is there as well. You also see some of the people from Syriza and PASOK. They are pretty moderate people. So there's potential there. And I have not seen what in the Turkish Grand National Assembly, what the composition is right now. But potentially there's something one can work on, which opens up another dimension as well that might help our policymakers in their attempts to move forward with this dialogue.
So thank you very much, Professor Triantaphyllou. You make very important suggestions. So now I'm going to switch to, again, Professor Tsakonas. So Professor Tsakonas, you know, when is the right time to tackle these questions? I mean, what kind of, so, you know, Professor Triantaphyllou mentioned some very concrete points, very concrete projects. So when is the right time to move to this direction? What are the obstacles to that? I mean, he mentioned very concrete, constructive policies. What is preventing this, and what is the role of media in this process?
Well, let me first of all touch upon some of the
Mm-hmm.
thousand issues raised by Dimitris.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting ones, but obviously I cannot address all of them, and try to link it with your question. I think it is of particular importance, especially when one refers to Greece or to the Greek political system or Greek decision makers, the role of personalities. It is of particular importance to touch upon the issue of culture, for example, which is characterize to put it in a different way, what kind of culture the Prime Minister of Greece is a carrier of. It is of particular importance to highlight the fact that the current Prime Minister, Tsakonas, is a carrier of a resolution culture, which means that it believes that Greece's national interests are better served via the resolution of a conflict with Turkey, and this is very important, particularly when compared to other cultures carried by other prime ministers in the past. So to the extent that we might look for an honest compromise with Turkey, or to the extent that the prime minister is a true believer of an honest compromise with Turkey, is a very important issue. We have to touch upon and highlight it. Also, we should take into account the extent of to what extent the same rationale or the same culture is being shared by other political forces in Greece. For example, the main opposition party, the radical left Syriza, or the center-left party, PASOK. It is, again, in terms of time, of particular importance that this particular resolution culture run by the prime minister is being shared by the major opposition party and to a certain extent by the center-left party, for decisions to be made in accordance with this resolution culture and to the direction of first normalizing relations with Turkey and then do our best for resolving the issue. This is number one. Number two, Dimitris referred to epistemic communities as a means of putting forward the idea of creating a context of collaboration between the two countries. Let me remind you at this point that this has happened back in the Cold War era between the epistemic communities in the United States and Soviet Union, and it worked perfectly well. So we should really touch upon this issue and do our best in order to create the better conditions for getting into that network of academics or analysts from one side and from the other side. Number three, there are certain issues which have been highlighted by the two heads of states, President Erdogan and Prime Minister Mitsotakis. Those certain issues refer to a roadmap, a particular roadmap. which consists of three elements we should have in mind, and I think it is important to highlight those three elements. The first is the refinement and strengthening of the so-called positive agenda, that is economic relations between Greece and Turkey. The second is the confidence-building enterprise, which is not being limited to military CBMs. The third is the revival of the exploratory talks, this time through an upgraded scheme of political dialogue, which will be monitored by the two ministers of foreign affairs, George Gerapetritis and Hakan Fidan, which seems to be a very forward-looking agenda, a very demanding agenda, which goes beyond crisis stability and normalization of relations between Greece and Turkey. So that demanding agenda brings me to my second point, which has to do with, I think has already been mentioned by Dimitris, what can be done not simply at the bilateral level, but also at the multilateral level. What are the proposals available? What are the propositions made or recommendations made or decisions made by the European Union or other third parties with regard to the Greek-Turkish conflict? And there is indeed one particular decision which has already been made since 2020 by the President of the EU Council regarding the organization of a multilateral conference in the Eastern Mediterranean, which has been discussed and to a certain extent being accepted by President Erdogan himself as well. And also based on what has already been mentioned, I think Mehmet mentioned that, we should be in search of initiatives, particularly multilateral initiatives, which are rules-based and which are also realize that the costs involved in following unilateralist policies due to the dominance of balance of power considerations exceed the benefits or possible payoffs they could collectively achieve if more collective relationships are chosen. So there are indeed already certain proposals on the table. We should further elaborate on those proposals and simply do our best for not only refining what has already been agreed between the two heads of states, but also come up with some other interesting proposals. Some of them are related. I'm not sure whether Dimitris mentioned that in the announcement of the Greek-Turkish Forum lately regarding a number of issues, a number of proposals, such as, I'm now looking at it, launching cooperation on uncontested areas, such as archaeology, environment, fighting wildfires, academic collaboration, this is what the epistemic community is about, scientific research. All this could be a way to build up trust and goodwill. I'll stop at this point.
Thank you very much. So these are really very important and concrete suggestions. So I'm gonna now switch to Zuhal. So Zuhal, in the beginning you mentioned that the third parties are not, from the Turkish point of view, third parties are not playing a constructive role. So this is the general understanding from the Turkish perspective, Turkish public. So what kind of roles do you think third parties, including US, EU, play to move forward relations in the positive direction? So yeah, how can they play constructive role? So yes, it is mentioned that, you know, and Professor Tsakonas mentioned a couple of points, but what is your take on this issue?
Actually, we have an example right now in front of us in between Lebanon and Israel. So they are in a very difficult the relationship. So they found a way to overcome maybe a very, let's say this for a specific area of relation, but they find a way to solve this the issue of the sharing the seasons and the transfer of this energy and use of energy. This is a very good starting point. So if we look at the transformation of international atmosphere, we can see there is such a nice window of opportunity right now, because we see that there is a change in Turkish-US relations, and we start to I think, not understand each other. Maybe it's not always good to have so maximalist in our, let's say, the wishes to have what kind of relationship. Maybe we want a perfect relationship, but it's not always possible. But now there is a better relationship, and we recognize how important is NATO for stability and peace in our region. So as two very important countries in our region, so so we are important for Eastern Mediterranean as two important than the states. So United States may be a very good actor and a mediator in between us to overcome maybe this energy and the limitation issue about exclusive economic zones. And we have some very important issues like the Cyprus problem. So that if the actors wants to overcome that issue, there is also a way to solve it. That's why I need to refer that the third actors can be very constructive if they want to do that, because already we have this and the energy cooperation. So TANAP-TAP connection is very important. So there is a middle corridor. There is some other, let's say, the means of cooperation already functioning very well, even in the difficult times. Maybe we don't remember them and we don't want to underline them in difficult times, some good parts of our cooperation initiatives. That was energy and the routes of transportation. So from that aspect, I want to underline the importance of existence of two powerful governments in these two countries. This is a very good opportunity right now. So this is also a very supportive thing to this window of opportunity. I understand very well how Dimitri explained this imposing an agenda perception. This is understandable from one approach, but also we have to overcome that, let's say, the worries, because I know that in Greek-Turkish relations, when the actors, governments come around the table, some let's say critics comes against these actors, the governments, like they are giving some important, let's say, the shares or something, you know, the big concessions. So these are problematic. But when we look at other examples for the Greek public and Greek friends, I want to say there is an agreement with Italy right now in between Italy and Greece, and it was not what is imagined by Greece or what is imagined by Italy. That was an agreement. So it was not maybe perfect from both sides, but it was an agreement. So I'm a little bit demanding from these governments and the time frame. Maybe we need to go a little bit more. We need to have more progress in this nice the window of opportunity, because there are two strong governments and they are very strong to explain the standpoint to their public by being very transparent. And also I need to underline another very important thing to Greek and public opinions. Both Greece and Turkey have very strong diplomatic teams. They know how to do these things, so nobody can impose each other something. So each side have some strong and weak positions maybe, but they may find to deal these issues to find a common point. So I think this is the right time for dealing with some progress, maybe more than tourism, more than, I don't know. Okay, these are important issues, but we may go to solve maybe a little bit more significant thing, to be more, let's say, the hopeful for to overcome some other problems. First of all, we need to give up this waiting for the right time, the perspective. So we are always waiting 50 years, 60 years. We cannot wait for all these things 50 years more. So if we try enough, there will be a way to solve the problems. So that's why I think what is important for us now, okay, we should cooperate economically. We need to progress in our confidence building measures and revival of exploratory talks. But all we know that exploratory talks reach out a point. So this is also very important. So there are some disagreed points, but there are agreed ones. So why we don't go there? Why we don't utilize these findings? So this is important, and maybe I want to be more optimistic to think about these things. And as Professor Tsakonas explained very well, European Union may play a very important role. At the end, all these energy things, let's say the pipelines, the rules, the being hub, all are related with going to Europe. So Europe is energy hunger center, and we are trying to transfer our energy over our countries. So at the end, we need to cooperate. It cannot go from the space. So we have to cooperate somehow. And when we look at other initiatives like let's say the cooperation initiatives with the rising actors here next to us or a little bit far away, again, we need to cooperate. There are many different windows of opportunities. So that's why I think we may go a little bit more, maybe by going to international courts for resolution of the problem, by creating some, let's say, the common points. These are possible with this government. So the media can be somehow, I cannot say satisfied. They won't be satisfied with explanations, but they can be utilized in that process. Because what is very important to underline for Turkish public, I need to say that maybe it's not so well known, but after the earthquake, what happened? Even in the southern Cyprus, the Greek Cypriots were so much supportive to Turkish people. It is the same for what's happening in Greece now, fires. So again, we can see that public opinion is ready. So there is no, so let's say the high tension right now. So this is the time to progress. It's not imposing. We are capable actors in our region. Two important states, they have capacity in their diplomacy. Nobody can impose anything to other one without its intention. So it's time to move, according to me.
Thank you very much. So, Professor Triantaphyllou, I mean, my last question is, as we see, there are some very reasonable voices, moderate voices from both Turkey and Greece, and we see these voices, we come together occasionally. However, when we go back to public, this unconstructive voices are overheard, and they dominate the media and overall public discussions. So what do you think is the right way to, boost the more constructive voices to generate, these the discussed epistemic constructive communities? I mean, what is the right way? I mean, both Turkish and Greek communities. So what is the right way to publicize, make these more constructive voices more vocal? What is your suggestions on this?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when I listen to the Greek media, I take part in discussions as well on television, on the radio, or in printed press, just like Professor Tsakonas and many others. Sometimes I have the feeling that, in particular in the media, but also among colleagues, we feel, but also the media feels like they're setting the agenda, which, and this is interesting too. It's whatever is being said is, the word of the land. It's not like this, because our two governments just proved that they could sit down and set up a framework the way that Professor Tsakonas described it, with its 3 parts, and how they're going to move forward. So one is recognizing who are the real actors in this process, as opposed to those that think that they are, because everybody has a perspective. The thing is also, I think, but where the governments can help is in terms of guiding that public dialogue. I mean, Zuhal mentioned, because the perception is, I mean, she just said it, but she knows, but Alexandroupoli, the American base, there's no American base in Alexandroupoli. There's no American base. There's American concern. The Alexandroupoli is being used as a port for NATO. And it's the Americans and the Portuguese and the Brits and the French and so many others going through rotation and sending arms either to support our allies in Eastern Europe or sending arms and weapons to Ukraine. But so on the other hand, in the Greek case, we do not mention the NATO dimension so much, but we mention that this is used as a deterrent against Turkey, just like Greece arming itself. Yes, every country has a need. I mean, now we're having a discussion in Greece that whether Turkey will get its F-16s or not, or upgrade the other ones, but it needs this for its security and for the security of the alliance. So even this, just saying that, even Greece getting its Air Force upgraded with F-16s or the Rafales or the F-35s, it's duty and responsibility as part of the southern flank of NATO together with Turkey to protect the alliance, because they're protecting ultimately their own security. So there are things like that that could play in the public discourse, which sometimes, from the Greek case, it's really, the Turks are, I think Zuhal talked about, well, the defense industry, or Panayotis, Tsakonas talked about it, right? The missiles and so on. Fine. How you change the discourse. It's not about this new missile that's been built by a Turkish firm that has a capability to hit Athens. And that's what's played. And therefore, whoever says this, because none of us rational, I like to think that we're more rational and moderate, would say this. It's someone who is more extreme. And this is that tidbit is played on Greek television. And I'm sure that some of the more crazy things said on Greek TV or wherever are also being played on Turkish television, and it becomes, look what the Turks are saying about us and what the Greeks are saying about us. And it does not reflect, I think, the general tendencies in the epistemic communities, in the ones that know. So I think one has to sort of play with that. And I think there is media. I mean, the media setting is different in Greece and in Turkey, fine. But I think among the main media in both countries, there are ways to focus on this and play a little bit with the message. I mean, interestingly, I was 13 years in Turkey. Last year, for the first time, I was targeted directly by a media outlet, which was very interesting. I'm going to see this gentleman tomorrow because we are moving forward to a new era, right? Of course, it's easier for me now as a professor at Panteion than a professor at Kadir Has University to do this. But I'm sure when I'll meet him tomorrow, it's going to be a very interesting discussion because, and he can shape what comes out of his newspaper, just like likewise his colleagues in Greece can also shape sort of what comes out of Greek newspapers. So I think we need to play a little bit, to guide the process. And I think this is where more discussions, with the media too, one of the things I always talked about this, when the rapprochement process started back in 1999, the media setting was totally different. It was print journalism that was key, some television, and you had people like Mehmet Ali Birand and Papachelas on the Greek side. Who replaced Mehmet Ali Birand after he passed away? Because, now it's people, media also means online things, and, it's really a setting that's totally changed. Who is this new generation of journalists on both sides that actually, it's not just epistemic communities. Maybe we also need to ensure that our media people have more concerted dialogue among themselves. Because, as I said, the media spectrum is so much wider. But I do not hear, who is the next Mehmet Ali Birand? I do not know. Even though I'm sure there are worthy journalists in Turkey, just like in Greece, that are willing to continue this debate. So I think it's just a question of tinkering a little bit the dialogue and shaping it to the point that people like Panayotis and myself, at least in Greece, do not feel that we are losing the public discourse. yes, the momentum is good. And I think it's been good more or less, even though it's complicated for the last 4 or 5 years, because I like the way Panayotis talked about, you know, the resolution culture that the Prime Minister Mitsotakis has. And because one of the things he brought in and allowed people like us to express ourselves is that systematically he's been talking, which is interesting. It's always been a good position of why going to the International Court of Justice or some arbitration, but he's more systematically brought this into the public debate. Yes, many people have reacted to it, but he's been more systematic about it, just like it was expressed after the meeting with President Erdogan in Vilnius. And this is part of, you know, the discussion officially now, part of that framework, right? So this has been good, but you still have to struggle with public debate. Last point too, one of the things I think Professor Tsakonas and I and other colleagues in the Greek-Turkish Forum talk about a lot, for example, when we get, say, because television is important, in particular where you go and speak. So if I were to watch my 10 minutes of fame on TV, I went and found the video on YouTube, I would see, depending on the theme of the day, the importance, 10,000 people have watched it, 20,000 maximum. That's it. This is how much we get. Some of the people that have been excluded from mainstream media and some of the more radical elements that try to shape public opinion and have found an outlet, for example, on YouTube or social media, it's amazing. Their numbers, 100,000 people watching. Now, you know, because they do not have the TV thing, they have social media, YouTube channels, and it makes you wonder whether it's the same 100,000, so it's not bad. So, you know, this is it, and this is where they found an outlet, or really there is an audience out there we have to work with, which is not reflected in, you know, in more mainstream print, television, radio. So, but I think there too we can sit down. I think there's work to be done within the Turkish, between the Greeks, and then between ourselves also, how to work on this message. Anyway, this is just some thoughts that you need to stop me, otherwise I can talk forever.
No, thanks a lot. These are really, really very useful suggestions. So I have to close this, but I think we are far from, you know, finished with this discussion. So, but to finish this, I mean, I think the negative public discourse often defeats the more moderate positive momentum. And I think there is already a positive constructive momentum. So I think right now what we need is to, I mean, this momentum should continue, and we shouldn't leave aside all these constructive mood to the initiatives of some, you know, unconstructive voices or the public discourse. I think the decision makers from both sides have some agenda in their minds. Let's hope that this will not be defeated by some, you know, negative public debate. So there are already roots of constructive discussion. I know that this will not be easy, but there are some opportunities. So thanks for all your contributions, all your suggestions. I think we will continue to move forward with this discussion and probably, you know, touch some other items. But I think once we come to this point, I think the managing the public mood, managing the public discourse is as equally as important as managing the relations between the decision makers. So I think we have to manage those two processes to lead to a more constructive agenda. Thank you for your contributions, and thank you for our followers from the social media.
Thank you.